training to send me an email and let me know that you need CRC credits.
And I also started a recording.
Thanks, Bernie.
So.
Linda, I will monitor the chat too during your presentation. Do you want me to give you questions if they pop up?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That'd be great. Feel free to interrupt me. Jump up and down. I'll be talking, so just jump up and down, scream, whatever you want. Let me know.
It looks like I have had a few more people that came on after I launched the poll, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer or not. So if you can't see the poll right now, email me if you need CRC credits. Just waiting on a few more people to answer. All right, I'm going to end the poll here in about 15 seconds. So please answer if you haven't already. It looks like there's 5 or 6 people that still need to answer. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody. I will turn it over to Linda.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I wish I could see all your faces, but hey, these are unusual times, and so here's an unusual presentation, I guess. My name is Linda Hedenblad, and I know some of you if you've been around for a couple of years, but I'm with the VR Development Group. I'm the founder of the VR Development Group. And I've been teaching ethics now for, I don't know, a very long time, 18 years, something like that. Before that, I was a VR counselor. And before that, I had nearly 20 years of direct service experience working with people with disabilities. So I have a great deal of experience. It also means I'm old if you start adding up all those years, but I love what I do. And in these times, talking to a computer by myself in the kitchen is not my favorite thing, but we make do, right? We're resilient people, so we make do. So today we're going to talk about ethical considerations for VR counselors, and I'm really excited to be here. Oh, one other thing that I've been busy doing lately, we rolled out in January a learning management system called Yes LMS. That's the most accessible learning management system in the world. So very excited to be involved in projects that continue to forward the civil rights of people with disabilities. So a little bit about me, and let's jump right into ethics. There we go. So today our objectives are going to be, we're going to define ethics. We're going to process through some difficult situations, and we're going to have as much of an interactive discussion as we can. Based on the technology, but we have some polls and so forth that you'll be participating in. Feel free to ask any questions through the chat box, and Shane has been kind enough to help out with that. And yeah, as much of a back and forth dynamic that we can have as possible would be awesome. And we're going to look at some thinking models and explore ethical boundaries. We're also going to talk about the unique aspects of ethics during this time of COVID-19. So here we are. This is where we are today, right? And counseling is changing due to COVID-19. And I know I don't have to tell you that, but it does bring up some different ethical dynamics. First of all, for those of us who, sometimes are not quite as aware as we might be on the impact on our clients, a lot of our clients work in the more low-income jobs, which puts them on the front line of of COVID-19, right? The people that work in grocery stores, clerks, nannies, people who do house cleaning, nurses' aides, all of those kind of jobs put them right on the front line. And they tend to not have sick days and they're lower income jobs. So that's something that we want to kind of be aware of during this time, is that a lot of our clients that are working currently are in the higher risk jobs. And they may be insured, they may be uninsured. Those of our clients that are living off of Social Security benefits, you know, for the rest of us, we're told go to the grocery store maybe as infrequently as possible. Now, I know South Dakota has different rates than we do here in Madison, Wisconsin. Right now in Madison, our rates are skyrocketing. So we have a mask order where you have to wear one in any public place because our hospitals are full and our numbers are skyrocketing. So, but many of us are able to go to grocery stores, for example, less frequently. We might stock up, and maybe where we would go once a week, we go once every couple of weeks. Well, people who have low incomes or have food stamps don't have those options. Food stamps, you can't order things online. People with lower income don't have the money to pay in advance for things. So these are all things to kind of be aware of our client population while we're struggling with the stress and the changes that come with the pandemic. Our clients may also be suffering and really struggling and having a much higher incidence of stress. There's also things to consider. Domestic violence has gone way up as more people are at home more often. Mental health issues, people who have mental health issues. You know, I don't know about you, but I've had some COVID dreams. I think it's been happening all over the world. And, you know, for our clients who may experience other kinds of stress, or maybe they're living in very small quarters and now suddenly they're in there with a family. There's a lot to be considered for our client population that we don't want to forget about during this time. We want to increase our awareness about what they're going through as we're trying to figure out, what the heck do I do? I don't know about you, but until February, I didn't really know what Zoom was. And now I use it a couple times a day. I even talk to my family on Zoom, which is odd. My son, who works at a grocery store, had to move out because he's working 50 hours a week. And my husband has medical conditions that don't allow our son to live with us any longer. Lots of things are happening. Things are changing, and this is a good thing to be aware of. So in today's counseling, the way that we're doing it more remotely, even though your offices are opening up and you may have a lower incidence in South Dakota, parts of South Dakota, than you do maybe in other parts of the country, we're still doing a lot of our work distance. And so we want to take a look at accessibility, the legal considerations, but to just kind of put a bow on this, when technology is used in the counseling relationship, and this comes right from the CRC Code of Ethics, rehab counselors are held to the same level of expected behavior and competence as defined by the code, regardless of technology. So we're going to talk about ethics in a very general way, and then we'll come back to boundaries. And as we're going through, we'll discuss some of the similarities and some of the differences of where we are at this moment in time. So this is a moment in time, and we're all sharing it, all of us and all of our clients. We're all together in this as a world. All right, so we have our first poll. And Shayna, if you wouldn't mind, the question is, do you believe you are more ethical than most? And don't worry, these polls are anonymous. So please be honest, and remember it's ethical, or it's ethics, right? So be ethical. Do you believe you're more ethical than most? It's great to see people voting. Oh, it's nice to see so many people voting. That's great. Fantastic. I think that's fantastic right there. So it looks like, and I'm going to go ahead and hit end poll. It looks like 58% of you do believe that you're more ethical than most, and 42% say no. So it's almost a split, but we're definitely leaning toward most people who are participating today believe that they're more ethical than most. So here we go, share the results. There you go. So there's your score, 58 to 42. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, that's very interesting because in a large national poll, 92% of Americans believe they're more ethical and moral than most. 92%. So what does this tell us? Now, I'm not a mathematician. If I was, I think I wouldn't have landed in the world of VR because they're very different skill sets, right? But I don't think 92% of us can be more than most, right? I think it would have to be, I don't know, 51-49, but 92% of Americans believe that they're more ethical than most. And this is a little bit of an alarm bell. I do believe that most of us have a little bit of an inflated sense of our ethics. And we're going to get to why that is here as we go along. So hang on to your vote and hold on to that. If you believe you're more ethical than most, that's cool. Hang on to it. We're going to see if we can maybe get you to think a little bit differently as we go through. So here we have a little cartoon. The dentist is working on the dude, and he says, you'll have to lie through your gums instead of your teeth for a while. And if you're not laughing out loud and grabbing your guts, that is because ethics cartoons are usually not very funny. All right. So hang on to that for a little while. Hang on to that sense of feeling, more like you're maybe more ethical than most, or maybe you don't believe that. Hold on to that for a little while. And I want to give you an example of doctors. So 61% of doctors believe that the freebies, now I don't know if you have known a doctor and know the amount of freebies these guys get, but we talk about, oh, should you accept the cookies from the client? We talk about that sort of thing. And medical doctors, meanwhile, are getting trips. They're getting, all kinds of really expensive stuff. They're getting, elaborate dinners. They're getting all kinds of stuff. 61% of doctors believe that the freebies given out by pharmaceutical companies affected the judgment of other physicians. But only 16% believed it affected their own judgment. And I think this is where we start to kind of pick things apart, because it can't be that either people are being affected by this, and I'll tell you what, the reason pharmaceutical companies do this is not because they like hanging out with doctors, it's because they want something back. And the doctors here, the majority of doctors believe, this isn't really impacting me, but it is, or the pharmaceutical companies wouldn't waste their time or money. So let's try an old problem here. This comes from ethical philosophy, and we're going to have another poll at the end of this, but not just yet. But here we go. This is called the trolley problem. Some of you, if you had philosophy in college, you might recognize this, but let's just try it out. You're walking near a trolley car track. Let's call it a train track. You're walking near a train track when you notice 5 people tied to the train track in a row. And in the next instant, you see the train's coming. So the train's coming, it's kind of out of control, and there's a signal lever right within your reach, and you can pull it. If you pull it, the train will veer off and kill 1 person that's on a side track. If you don't pull it, it will kill 5 people. So do you pull it in that instance and save 5 and sacrifice 1? Do you do nothing and sacrifice 5 and save 1? So what would you do? What would you do in that? Can we go ahead and pop up the next poll? So what would you do? Would you sacrifice 1 to save 5? or would you do nothing? It's fun watching the votes come in. This is a nice way of knowing you're still paying attention. You're not doing your laundry. Or I once had someone taking a bath when they were on one of these. And they forgot to turn off their microphone so we could hear the water running. So I've taught ethics to the naked. Not something everybody can say. All right. Oh, look at the numbers we got going here. Fantastic. All right. So with 91% of you voting right now, it looks like the majority, 79% of you would sacrifice one person to save 5. Well, that's pretty cool. That's what we call utilitarianism. So you would do what's in the best interest of the most people. And 21% said that you would do nothing. And that's very interesting as well. So 21% would leave the train and the 5 people to their fate. Well, with keeping that in mind and keeping some of the other things we just talked about in mind, let's move to the next one. Because now you're on a footbridge. So you're on a footbridge over a railroad track. And this time there's 5 people tied down there. And the train is rushing toward these 5 people again. Only this time, the only way you can save the 5 people is by pushing the guy next to you. So you got this big guy. He's like super tall, super just big, like in the old days, that Vikings player, that the refrigerator Perry, just big guy, big muscle, big, just tall, big guy. You're gonna push him over, you can save 5 people. But if you don't shove this stranger over onto the track, the 5 people will die. And don't try to get tricky on this and use your critical thinking and go, oh, well, maybe I could jump over. Or maybe something else could happen. Maybe I could warn the train. Not the only option you have is to push this stranger standing next to you over. Just give him a shove and push him in the way of the train. So let's try this poll. How many of you would push the guy next to you to save the 5 people? Would you sacrifice 1 to save 5? I love watching these come in. So interesting. I love the way people's brains work. So exciting. All right, let's take a look. It looks like, in this case, the majority of the people would do nothing. Now, that kind of throws our utilitarian doing the best for the majority of people at the sacrifice of the few, right? Kind of throws that right in the trash. Why, and go ahead and answer this in the chat, why is this different? Why is it different? Why wouldn't you throw a lever and at the sacrifice of 5 people, or to save one person, to sacrifice 1 person to save 5? Why is this different? Aren't you still doing the same thing, sacrificing 1 person to save 5 in the second scenario? What makes this different? So if you have a second and you can find the chat box, go ahead and it's in the toolbar at the bottom or top or wherever your toolbar is. There should be a click of options there, and you can answer. So what are people saying, Shayna? Oops, you're on mute.
It looks like most people agree that in the first situation, it feels a little less personal, and that in the second situation, you're actively doing something to kill someone.
And isn't that interesting? Because technically, and I do mean technically, in both situations, you are creating the action that causes the death of one person. So what I really love about this is we think, here's where that we all think we're more ethical than most kind of thing comes in, right? Or most of us do. Our brains are fickle when it comes to ethics. If we had a very clean and clear idea of right and wrong, things would be applied unilaterally. And in this situation, we're like, well, if I got to touch the guy, you know, as opposed to pulling a lever, that's worse. That's murder, you know. So, but really, it's the same scenario when you break it down. You're saving 5 people by sacrificing 1, but it feels so different because it's intimate. It's intimate. We would be intimately participating in that moment of committing, you know, somebody's death, right? It feels different. So when we think our ethics are clean and clear, and we think I can make good decisions, guess what? Our ethics are fickle. And what plays a role in that is not just our conscious behavior, but our cognitive unconscious. And so we have to really take a look at ethics, because we kind of can't be trusted unless we bring things into our consciousness. Now, the way we define ethics here, and I thank you for participating. That was super exciting. I wonder, did anybody say why they would push someone? And I know I didn't ask that question, but just curious.
No, mostly why they chose.
Why they chose.
Yeah. Someone said I viewed it the same as pulling the lever.
That's it. Yeah. So I'll tell you a funny story. When I took this class, I took a class. This is going to sound fancy, so hold on to your britches. I took a 1-year class online through Oxford University, the big fancy Oxford University. And it was on the philosophical ethics. And I wanted to do it because I was like, oh, I should probably brush up, kind of get all meh for when I teach this. And I had a friend ask me, what was that experience like if you could explain it in 3 words? And I said, smart school hard. Like, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But we did this exercise in here. And I was working with people from all over the world. I mean, literally, people were online that I could see from all over the world. And I was the only one that said, oh, I'd push the guy over. Because to me, with my ethics, I was like, yeah, well, that's actually even easier than the person who's seeing the train coming when I pull the lever, because this guy isn't going to expect it. He's probably thinking about what he's going to make for lunch, or whether he should let the dog out or whatever. He's having a normal day. I'm going to shove him over. He's going to be a hero, and he's going to die a very quick death, and you know, he won't have time to even worry about it. So that's where my morality went, and I shocked people from all over the world. So I guess there's a couple things to be learned from there. One is how we define things personally as to what's right and wrong is different for ourselves between scenarios. It's also different with other people that we know or work with, people in our environment. And the last thing that we learned is there's some of us who we probably shouldn't walk with on a bridge. So there, just so you know that. All right. So we're going to look at ethics today in 2 different ways. One is the principles that guide us, like the CRC Code of Ethics and our rules and so forth. And then what we bring into our jobs. So my experience of growing up in northern Wisconsin in a kind of rural area, my idea of life and death and right and wrong brought me to somehow the culmination of what made me, brought me to the moment where I would push a hypothetical person off a bridge. You may be different, right? So what do we bring to our jobs as far as our principles and values go? And are they static, or are they, as we just saw here in this example with the majority of you voting a different way, are they sometimes malleable where we think they're static. Like this is the right thing to do, and you do two different things in the same scenario, basically. All right, so let's explore all this because that'll be fun. Oops. All right, so first of all, the human brain is a magnificent thing. I think humans are just incredible. Every person who's on this call right now, it is an absolute, undeniable miracle that you are alive. I mean, let's think about it. I mean, not to get too weird in the morning with an ethics class, but even if you just think of the amount of sperm and an egg, the one that ended up, the combination that made you on that day with your mother and father and all of that, the likelihood of that actually happening is so small. Now take that back every preceding generation all the way back to the beginning of your family tree. The fact that all of your ancestors were attractive enough to mate, all of them lived through childbirth, right? All the way up to you, and all of the, I mean, that has to be one of the most unlikely things to ever happen, is what made you. You are a miracle. You are an absolute miracle. And with all of that, we are so flawed when it comes to thinking and our brains and our way of processing difficult situations. It's not that we're not miraculous. It's part of the miracle, the way that we turned out, the way our brains work. So 11 million bits of information per second are processed in our unconscious brain. Now, what I mean by that, if you've ever accidentally stepped off a curb and then something was about to speed by you, a bicycle or a car, and you jump back and you didn't even know, really, like consciously know you were jumping, that's our cognitive unconscious. When you got out of bed this morning and walked in to brush your teeth, the fact that your hallway didn't turn into a pit of alligators, our cognitive unconscious is paying attention for that. It would have known, oh, something's awry. It takes care of our environment. It takes care of a lot of the thinking. If we had to think of breathing and everything that we do during the course of a day, we wouldn't make it. We probably would only make it to brush our teeth, right? Because there's so much thinking that happens. Well, a lot of our thinking is in our cognitive unconscious, and a lot of the ways that we react to situations like the trolley problem are still in our cognitive unconscious. And in our conscious brain, only 40 bits per second. And isn't that just interesting? I remember one time I had, as an example of this, I had a candle on a table. I had some friends over, and I had a cat that walked too close to the candle and immediately, poof, went up in flames. And I reached over and I put the cat out with my hand. And because it was just on the surface of the fur, right? Didn't burn all the way down, just on the surface. It was all blue flame. And I put it out. And then I went back to talking to my friends, and my friends said, oh my gosh, your cat was just on fire. I can't believe you put it out like that. And I said, what? What are you talking about? That was the cognitive unconscious. My cognitive unconscious, thank goodness, wasn't waiting for my conscious brain to say, excuse me, yeah, you have a cat on fire, and perhaps you should think of the several ways you could put it out. My cognitive unconscious just kicked in and did it. And I was pretty much unaware of it at the time. So if we have to bring important decision-making in, like if we're processing through our ethical decisions, we have to be careful of letting our cognitive unconscious take over, right? Because it's made up of a lot of our experiences and our personal morality and our values and all of that stuff, which is really great for our decision making. We don't want to discount that stuff, but we don't want to have just a knee-jerk reaction as to what's right and wrong. If we want to be really ethical thinkers, we want to bring ethics from sort of that knee-jerk reaction into a place where we're really looking at it and being able to decipher the situation with our conscious brain. And that doesn't happen automatically. That's something that we have to work at doing. So there's 4 steps to increase our success in this. And one is to increase our awareness. Like thinking about the miracle of the brain and thinking about how much of our brain is automatic and how much of our brain is the smaller part, really how much we have to take in and consciously take a look at something and tease it out, right? So bringing ethics into our awareness, that's step 1. Step 2 is having some kind of decision-making model that takes our ethics away from just, that helps us put it in our conscious mind and takes it away from just our understanding. And sometimes if we have a difficult ethical problem, to really be able to know that this might be a good time. For example, maybe I'm struggling with something and I'm like, I have an idea what's right or wrong on this, but I'm going to ask Shana because she's kind of a different generation. And maybe she would look at this a little bit differently. She grew up in a different part of the world. Maybe she has a different background. I'm going to discuss it with her so that I can tease out, do some critical thinking and tease that out with her. And then our intent, what is our intent around our ethical decision making? We're going to talk a little bit about this too, because we are self-serving. It's not our fault. It's the way that our brains are constructed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. But our automatic go-to is to do what serves us as our own individuals and not maybe what serves the best of others. And then our action, how important it is to be cognizant of our action when it comes to ethical thinking. And sometimes that means doing things that are really difficult. So let's start with ethical awareness. So, since most of you are more ethical than most, and don't feel bad if you said that, I would have said the same thing. It's not just you. Have you lied to a stranger to get out of an awkward situation? Have you ever stolen something? Have you ever cheated at a game? When I used to, when I was a kid playing Monopoly, I'd always be the banker because I knew I could get more money if I was going broke. Have you ever lied on a resume? Have you ever lied on your taxes? Have you ever called in sick when you're not sick? Have you ever lied to a loved one to spare their feelings? Oh no, those pants don't make you look fat. Have you ever lied to a boss? And do not answer that on chat. Don't do it. Have you ever stolen a small office supply, right? All of these kinds of things, you're thinking, well, that wasn't such a bad thing. It was a very small thing. You're kind of rationalizing it, right? But we all kind of do these things to one degree or another, right? But none of us have lied to Bernie. Pretty sure that's the case. All right. So this is part of being human. It's part of being the miracle of humanity. Most people think of themselves as good and still enjoy the benefits of acting unethically. In fact, we all have a level that we won't go above. Like some people will say, well, I'll lie and cheat up to here. But I won't lie and cheat up to here because that would make me an unethical person, right? So we all kind of unconsciously have this level that we don't go above because then we're bad or then we're unethical. But we will have a level under that, right? That we'll rise to with this unethical behavior. So we tend to think of ourselves as good and still act unethically. Many of us have different standards at work than we do at home, which could go either way. Maybe you're a little less ethical at home and a little more ethical at work. I have an example before all of this stuff happened, the COVID. Our son, he's in college, he's 20. He and I and my husband went about 6 months ago, went to the grocery store, and my husband, there was a sale on wine. So my husband and I bought like a case. Which is good because we didn't know COVID was coming, but now we have wine. So we bought a case of wine because it was on sale, and it was supposed to be 20% off a case. And what they ended up giving us was 20% off a case and 20% off a bottle. So we ended up with, super cheap wine. And on the way home, my husband, but we didn't know it at the time. On the way home, my husband is looking at the receipt and he says, "Oh, they mischarged us. They gave us way too much of a discount." Now, in that moment, all three of us in the car were thinking in our heads, what do we do? And I know my son was thinking, what are they going to do? And my husband was thinking, let's just keep driving, because I know him. He's a little cheap. And I was thinking, well, we should just keep driving because I sure would like to get this cheap. But on the other hand, I was like, no, 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 you teach ethics. You should be an ethical person. So I had to hit that edge of where I could no longer, justify my unethical behavior. And I also knew the thing that pushed me even further is that my son was in the back of the car. And even though he's an adult man, I still wanted to show him that his mom is an ethical person. So it's like, all right, we're going to turn around. We're going to go back to the store. And we went back in and the manager said, why would you come back? So the manager had a different level of ethics, right? The manager was like, why are you people back here? You got a great deal, just go home. But we all felt great going home after that, knowing that we were ethical and we got cheap wine. So sometimes it pays off in both ways. But that was an immediate example of how all of us in the car were kind of fluctuating and looking at one another. And I was here and my husband was here and my son was like, where are those people? So in order to make a conscious effort to be ethical and moral, we have to be aware of the decisions that we make every day, especially during times of stress and change. Do we have stress and change? We sure do. We sure do, and we've had it for a while, and we might have it for a while longer. Stress will make us lower our threshold for lift our threshold for unethical behavior. Whereas maybe in normal everyday life, we'll act unethically up to this level and think it's okay and think we're still good people. We will elevate that during times of stress and change. Isn't that interesting? Because we're stressed, we're just like, oh no, that thing's okay. Just let it go, let it go, let it go. Where in times when we're less stressed, we'd say, okay, wait, that's not actually right. So we need to stop and figure that out. We have less horsepower for that kind of stuff. So we're going to bring all this into our awareness right now, because just because that's the case doesn't give us as professionals the excuse to be less ethical. All right. If you have any questions, put them in the box. So ethical decision making, let's start with that. So we have another poll. And just a second before we put the poll up, because I'll read the question, but you get to vote for a world leader. And your vote is the one that's going to, this is a world leader. Your one vote is going to decide who our next world leader is. And this has nothing to do with any other elections. This is hypothetical. So here we go. Candidate A associates with crooked politicians, consults with astrologers, has had 2 mistresses, chain smokes, and drinks up to 10 martinis a day, which is a lot of martinis. Candidate B was ejected from office twice, sleeps until noon, used opium in college, and drinks large amounts of whiskey every evening. And candidate C is a decorated war hero, a vegetarian, doesn't smoke, drinks an occasional beer, and hasn't had any extramarital affairs. So, do you want to put the poll up? Who do we vote for? Candidate A, candidate B, or candidate C? It's getting darker and darker and darker in Madison, Wisconsin. We're going to have a big storm. I love storms. All right, get a couple more people voting. Make sure you're still out there. Awesome sauce. Look at South Dakota on the money today. Right on. Okay, so the majority of you would vote for candidate C. Candidate C, who's a decorated war hero, a vegetarian, doesn't smoke, drinks an occasional beer, and hasn't had any extramarital affairs. We voted for candidate C. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at who you voted for. Drum roll, hypothetical drum roll. Candidate C is Adolf Hitler. Aw, it's not going to be a good several years. This is bad. We voted for Hitler. Aw. Now, keeping that whole World War II theme going, if you get your history head on, who do you think candidate B might be? Candidate B is Winston Churchill. Yeah, he drank a lot of whiskey. Had some opium in college. And candidate A, associates with crooked politicians, consults with astrologers, has had 2 mistresses, 10 martinis. Who could this guy be? One of our most loved presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yes. So this is another example of how, it seems easy. Of course you're going to vote. Well, so we learn a couple things here. Number 1, never trust a vegetarian. Just kidding, vegetarians. I love you. Don't worry about it. But it means that we just voted with very limited information and based on what it seems right? It feels right that we would vote for this war hero. It feels right that we'd vote for someone who looks on the outside more honest. But we just got duped into voting for I think I can safely say the worst human being in history, maybe up there, maybe with Caligula or something. I don't know. Way super bad. All right, we don't want him to be the leader. And here we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our first president with a disability, right? At least an obvious physical disability. And then we had Churchill, who led Britain and Europe through World War II. And we ended up with Hitler. All right, so let's see if we can improve our thinking a little bit better. So ethical intent, again, we all cheat up to a level that allows us to think of ourselves as reasonably honest. But the thing is, we have this part of our brains, the more I study this stuff, the more fascinating I think it is. It's just the way our brains are structured are not necessarily geared toward good decision making. We really have to bring that into our cognitive consciousness because the pleasure centers of our brain actually light up when we're told that something that we believe is correct advances our self-interest. So here's the quote: "The pleasure centers in our brain light up when we are told that our beliefs are correct or that a conclusion that advances our own self-interest." So I think this is super important, and I wish critical thinking was taught in school because it is getting harder and harder to be a critical thinker, especially with the polarizing of our country right now. We tend to fall into one pocket or another. When I was growing up, that wasn't the case. Growing up in the 70s in northern Wisconsin, if you met somebody that had a different belief than you, you would talk it out. And you would, even if you didn't agree, you still would have a degree of respect for the other person. And things are getting weird. But I'll tell you what, it's because of this part of our brain. When we hear something so if we're going through Facebook or we're going through places where we get a lot of information, if we see something, even if it's not true, and I don't care any side of any political spectrum you're on, we all fall for this, where we see something that may or may not be true, but it agrees with our thinking. So our endorphins are released. That little bit of it almost gives us a little bit of a morphine rush. Our endorphins are released and we're like, of course, this feels right. This is what's right? And I want to give you an example, So I was sitting with a group of friends, different group of friends in the candle and the cat incident. This was only a couple years ago. And we were having some kind of Asian food that had baby corn in it. And I will eat almost anything, as you might be able to tell from this lovely double chin. But I can't stand baby corn. Like, I see, even just looking at this picture is a little repulsive. I can't stand that stuff, right? So I'm sitting with a table full of people, and one of them is my friend who's a doctor, and a medical doctor, and we're sitting there, and I go, ugh, this has baby corn in it. I don't even think this stuff is food. I mean, what is it? Little tiny corns that they have to hire people with little tiny, hands to like husk. I mean, this doesn't even seem possible. And she looks at me, and she meant this with every piece of her integrity. So she said, it's not food. It's actually genetically modified and is grown in a petri dish. And I was like, oh, of course it is. Of course it is. It's baby corn. It's grown in a petri dish. And if it weren't for cell phones and the doubt of the other people at the table, I would have gone through however much of my life believing that baby corn was grown in a petri dish for two reasons. One, a doctor told me, and she's an authority figure. And two, it's disgusting. So as soon as she said it's grown in a petri dish, that part of my brain lit up and said, hallelujah, you've been vindicated. This stuff is not food, right? Well, guess what, people? It's food. Baby corn is also known as a cornlet. It's a cereal grain taken from maize, and it's harvest early. So when the silk starts coming up, they harvest it, and they just cut the top part of the corn off, and that is baby corn. Just a little piece at the top. All right. What I learned from that moment, and it was my friends, the other friends sitting around, and they were like, it's not grown in a petri dish. And I said, of course it is, and they got out their cell phones and they found out the truth. In that moment, as silly as it sounds, in that moment, I realized how my brain is, how I can be so incredibly swayed by inaccurate information because it agrees with what I already believe in. And it was remarkable. It was like in that moment. So now I tend to question things more. I hope that now, if somebody said baby corn is grown in a petri dish, I would question that. Let's move on, because that's just gross. And here's an example of how and please chime in if you have any questions. The next thinking flaw that we have as human beings is that we tend to rationalize our behavior. All right? So it's what we call cognitive dissonance. I see what I want, and I want to get there. I might rationalize my behavior because I know I shouldn't do it. Some part of me knows I shouldn't, but I really want to get to the end goal. So I'm going to rationalize my behavior in such a way that I get what I want, even though I know what I want might not be correct. So here's an example. Katie's been working with Ben for nearly a year. Ben has a traumatic brain injury, and he has partial blindness from orbital blowout fractures. Ben experiences emotional outbursts secondary to his brain injury. We've all met people like this that have traumatic brain injuries, and part of the brain damage is their ability to control their emotions, right? And sometimes it's tears, sometimes it's violence. And this guy has a lot of outbursts. He's hard to work with because he's just volatile. And Katie knows Ben isn't dangerous, but he can be super irritating to work with. She doesn't look forward to him at all, to working with him. So she hasn't heard from him in a couple of weeks. She knows she should call and find out what's happened to Ben, but she sends him a letter instead because she's hoping that he won't respond to written contact and that she can close his case. This is an example of rationalization. Did she do anything wrong sending a letter to close this case? No. That's not technically wrong. But what was her motivation and why did she do it? She did it because she doesn't want to work with this guy. And she rationalized her behavior and saying, well, there's different ways I can communicate. I could communicate by letter. I'm just going to do that. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm allowed to do that within my work. But what she's actually doing is she's committing an ethics violation. She's saying, I don't want to work with this person because they're irritating, not because they're a bad person, but because of the traumatic brain injury. So some of you have heard me say this before with other ethics trainings, but this is what I like to call the second piece of pie argument to kind of simplify things. If you've just had a delicious lunch or breakfast, let's say you all had a nice fine breakfast this morning, and some of you are probably eating it right now, I'm guessing. And you shouldn't eat till lunch, but here I come through the monitor with this amazing homemade wild blueberry pie, and I'm just going to pass it through to you, and you're going to take it, and you're like, oh, that looks good. I shouldn't have this because I just had breakfast, and I'm going to have I've been trying to be healthy. I've gained my COVID-15. Some of us have. And, I shouldn't be eating the pie, but wow, I really want it. So you got what you want, and where you are now. I shouldn't have it. I really want the pie. This is where we start rationalizing. If this is strong enough, if this desire is strong enough, we will rationalize our behavior to get to the pie. And what would be our rationalizations? Some of us might say, well, I'll exercise later. Or, hey, this is virtual pie. It doesn't have any calories. Or, oh, it's blueberries. It's full of antioxidants. This is actually good for me, right? Whatever it is, we're going to find those little excuses. We all do it. We all rationalize something for something. Maybe it's a nice pair of shoes. We can't really afford them. Maybe it's a nice new fishing pole. We know we have a good fishing pole, but this other one's even better. Will we rationalize our way so that we get to that thing we want? Not all rationalizations are bad. If we never rationalize, we'd never have a second piece of pie, or we'd never have a piece of pie. We'd never have another fishing pole, right? We'd never have things that really we want. But because we rationalize all the time, we do the same with our clients, and we don't know it. So to kind of pull this together for a second, most of our thinking happens in our unconscious brains. Only a very small fraction happens in our conscious brains. We tend to, when we hear something, so let's say we have a client come in, and we were kind of thinking, I don't think this client's actually going to follow through. I just have a feeling about them. And they come back and they legitimately couldn't follow through because of something that happened in their lives. We're going to say, I knew it. They can't follow through. And we might follow up with something like, well, I had a feeling about your motivation. I didn't think you were going to be motivated enough to do that. That may not be an accurate statement, even remotely at all. But because that they came in and said, I didn't follow through and I have legitimate reasons, that part of our brain just lit up and said, I knew it. I knew it. So our brains are they're not really designed for great thinking, but they're also magnificently designed for great thinking. But when it comes to situations like these, we have to pull it in and look at it and really examine it and think, okay, am I reacting because of what? Am I reacting in my cognitive conscious? Is this a gut feeling? Am I accidentally voting for Hitler? What is going on here? Should I push a person off a track? All these things. Look, it's only 10 a.m. this morning and we've already discussed murder and electing Hitler. I mean, it's been quite a morning. All right, so these rationalizations also impact us. So what do we do? And here's a lot of the rationalizations that we often hear ourselves saying, and I hear, and now because I've been teaching this, my brain is tuned and I can hear this. I hear people say it out loud, well, I'm just fighting fire with fire. That client is a jerk and they need, they've been just rude and they argumentative and now they need something, well, I'm going to put their needs on the bottom of the pile because I'm just fighting fire with fire. Or, well, everyone's doing it. I hear that. Boy, having a teenager, you really hear that. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, well, everybody would jump off a cliff. Would you do the same thing? I sounded like my mother. But, you know, you hear that a lot. Everyone's doing it, right? It's okay if I don't gain personally. I can do this thing for a client. Maybe I'll give this person a little extra something because it's okay if I don't gain personally. Or, oh, I was just doing it for you. It's not unethical if I'm doing it for somebody else. These are all types of rationalizations, and they often fall into our work environment. And again, it's part of getting us to where we want to be. We know we shouldn't do it, but we use a rationalization to get us there. And because we're able to rationalize, we think it's okay. And where this really becomes a problem. So I'm going to just ask for the chat box. What do you think is, according to maybe the code of ethics or according to your own experience, what is the worst thing a VR professional can do to a client? What is the worst thing? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. Bernie, I just saw he said go back and buy more wine earlier. That thought did cross my arm. Do harm is something that somebody's saying. Not give them enough, basically lying. Okay, what's the very worst thing we can do? Deny services, that's very good because of race, or ignore them, that's very good. Hope they'll go away, all of these things. Having no contact, promising something you can't provide, all of these are very good. Let's get a couple more. What is the worst thing that you can do? Discriminate, I love this, this is great. What is the worst thing that you can do? Undermine the direction from a supervisor or federal regs. You guys are you are lose trust. I love that you think that these are the worst things that you can do. Set people up for failure, break confidentiality without a reason, judge or discriminate, belittle goals. These are all so good. I mean, they're so bad. They're so bad, but you're right on target. Well, I was thinking in a different direction, but maybe we've had enough darkness that you're not thinking of it this morning. These are all excellent, 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 excellent. And we don't want to do these. These are egregious ethics violations, all of them. They're a little more subtle than the one I was thinking of, and that's sleeping with a client, right? Or actually, you know, the majority of people usually say sleeping with a client, and then I'm like, well, wouldn't murdering a client be worse? But I guess sleeping with a VR professional is worse than murder. But so sleeping with a client would be way up there, right? That you can get fired for that. You know, that's bad, 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 bad. Well, you know what? It happens. It happens. It's probably not happening as much now because of the distance, but it's definitely something that happens every year. If you look at the CRC ethics violations, it happens all over the country. How can that possibly happen? I mean, you know, discrimination, yeah, that's terrible. But you can kind of understand consciously, well, you can kind of see how that happens. You know, people have different thoughts and beliefs and all that, and we'll get into discrimination a little bit later. But, or belittling a person's goals, you can almost see how a human could do that. You're like, oh yeah, I could, you know, it's not right. But you can kind of even think of people that might do that. But sleep with the client, how does that happen? Well, the reason I bring that up is because that doesn't come from one rationalization. That probably, for most people that commit that violation, that comes from an entire string of rationalizations that are strung together, that if you look at any one of the rationalizations individually, you'll be like, well, that's not so bad. For example, the counselor meets with the client for the first time and they feel a mild attraction and they kind of get the sense the other person's attracted. Well, they start their rationalizations. Well, I can handle my feelings. This is not a big deal. There's your first rationalization, right? I can handle this. It's not a bad, it's, you know, whatever. The second time they meet, the third time they meet, maybe they start meeting later in the day and the counselor starts saying, oh, that actually fits better for their schedule. That's another rationalization, because what the counselor wants is to be closer to that individual, right? Maybe have more time toward the end of the day. So they start rationalizing, oh, you know, it probably fits better with their schedule. If you just take that one rationalization, it fits better with their schedule, you cannot say that's an ethics violation in and of itself. But when strung with rationalization after rationalization after rationalization, it gets to the point where the counselor is now sleeping with the person. That's why we talk about rationalizations. The most grievous ethics violations are made typically of tiny rationalizations. It's not like somebody gets up in the morning and goes, ooh, a light caseload, maybe I'll sleep with someone, right? It doesn't work that way. It's one tiny rationalization after another. And that's why they're so dangerous, because picked apart, they're easy. I mean, they're not that bad, right? Same is true with some of the other things that you guys brought up. Let's just use this instance right now for to think of. This one was tough for me when I was a counselor. When I started working with people who had cultural differences, where you know, I grew up in the I was born in 1962, so I grew up in the 70s, and at that time there was a lot of women's rights stuff, right? I mean, you younger folks can't even imagine how easy it was to discriminate against women at that time, right? And so just seeing the world change as a woman, even when I was in college in the 80s, I had a professor pull me aside and say, I know that you're really interested in academics and maybe getting your master's degree, but you really shouldn't disregard the most important thing in life, which is for you to become a wife and mother. You know, it's just stuff you can't get away with now. Getting touched and all kinds of stuff that would happen in work situations. Just, you can't do it today, but wow. So here I was a counselor and I had this, you know, woo, women thing going on, because that's the history I grew up with. I lived where it was different and where people could do things. You could just easily not hire a woman because you would hire a man over a woman because a man is the caretaker of the home. Like all of that, just, okay. So now I'm working with somebody who comes in and their cultural difference is that women are treated differently. Their roles are different. Their expectations are different. They're not to make up their own mind. They're to only go into a profession that suits the family. You know, all of the family makes the decisions. Working with individuals like that, when I first became a counselor out in Seattle a few years ago, when that happened to me, it evoked this thing inside of me with like, oh, honey, I need to liberate you. You know, what do you want to do? The heck with your family, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, I know what's right for you. This is a country where we live with individual rights. But what I wasn't listening to, or what I was at risk of not listening to, is what does that person want? Because it's not about me. And if I were to not listen to what the person wants, now occasionally I did have clients that were in those either religious or cultural situations that would call me women clients and say, I don't want to do what my family wants me to do. And I was like, okay, well, clearly you're the client, you get to choose, you know. Let's talk about some of your fears around what will happen with your family. Let's blah, 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 blah. Let's make this happen for you. But if somebody came in and they said, this is what my family wants me to do, and what my husband wants me to do, inside I'm like, you know, because that's my value system. That's mine. I own that. But that wasn't the client's. And what I didn't understand, I really learned this in particular with one client who, actually it was with a friend of mine. A friend of mine called me one time, and she came over from a rural part of Mexico with her family. She had spent most of her life in this country, but her family had spent most of their life in Mexico. So they were here, and she called me on Thanksgiving, and I said, well, what are you doing today? And she goes, oh, I've been in the bed with my grandmas and my auntie, and we've been braiding each other's hair. And I grew up in northern Wisconsin. If I crawled in bed with my aunties and my grandma, they would say, what the heck are you doing? Get away from me. You know, we had boundaries, like big ones. You know, I think when we hugged, we hugged, there was light between us, right? There, you know, that, I think it was because of parkas in the winter. I don't know what it was, but that familial intimacy was something that was so unusual to me. But I also thought, well, you know what, that's really kind of cool. You're having these intimate female experiences like that, like laughing and braiding hair and hanging out and doing all these kinds of things. That sounds pretty cool. That doesn't happen in my northern Wisconsin culture, right? So I started to see that maybe there are things that maybe I'm looking too myopically, right, at other people's situations. So these rationalizations, how we rationalize, when you have a knee-jerk reaction to somebody else that's different from what you think they might want, you have to really break it down and think about it. Not just go with our knee-jerk reaction, because again, our brains are beautifully flawed. So ethical action is the last one. And here's what I would encourage you to do. If you're rationalizing, if you find yourself rationalizing, you're like, you know, it's fine. What I'm doing is fine. Add a little morality, because it will break your rationalization and make you think about it. Ask yourself, how would I feel telling a colleague or supervisor about this? If you ever have a situation where you don't want to tell someone else, especially a colleague or a supervisor, stop it. Stop it. You're probably doing something unethical. You need to really think it through. If you decide to do an unethical behavior, that responsibility lies nowhere but you, right? What if this is, and that comes right from an ethical philosophy, social constructivism. If you feel like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to send that letter because I don't like this guy and I'm hoping he doesn't respond. But, you know, I don't really feel like going and telling my supervisor, yeah, guess what? I got rid of him. I sent him a letter, right? If that doesn't feel right, then it's probably wrong. What if this is something that everyone else did? This comes from deontology, and you don't have to remember that. But what if this is what if no one worked with people they don't like? What if none of us worked with people we don't like? It would make our jobs a lot easier for sure, but it wouldn't make the world better, right? Oftentimes, the most difficult people that come to us are the ones that need the most help. And society saying, hey, you know, all of the things that's structured in that person's world to bring them to us, we might be the end of the road, right? So, and do I believe people should be treated as an end in themselves? And if I do, how does this decision reflect my belief? Are people to be an end in themselves or a means to an end? And this one's a good one when you're thinking of closing someone. Let's say, and I know our closure is different under WIOA, but it's not that different. We still feel a lot of pressure to have successful closures. So let's say we're getting to day 89 and this person calls us and says, you know what, this job really isn't working out for me. And we were like, ooh, I'm glad I got that on the voicemail because I'm not going to answer that for another couple of days. Are you treating that person as a means to an end, as a way to get a successful closure, or as an end in themselves, right? As a person. And I'll give you an example of this. My brother was in services, VR services, not that long, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And he had been in a car accident. He he has post-concussive syndrome. He had a pretty significant brain and closed head injury. Anyway, and other injuries. But so he goes into a VR office for the first time because he was about to lose everything. He didn't have insurance. He went from having his own home, his own blah, 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 hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical expenses. He had to declare bankruptcy, but he really was at risk of losing everything. He goes into VR. He gets there an hour early because you know how it is with people often with brain injuries or any kind of disability. After a while, they start hyper focusing on that one appointment. Like you call them, are you busy this week? I'm busy between 10 and 11, right? You know, that's just like, woo. Older people get like that too with their medical appointments. It's just, they hyper focus. So he got to his appointment an hour early for this VR counselor. And she thought he was an hour late because she got him mixed up with somebody else. So she comes out and the very first thing she says to my brother is, very first thing she says to him is, you're late. We work with people who want to get employed. What if this was a job interview? What kind of message are you sending me? And what kind of message are you sending an employer if you show up late? That was the first thing. Not, this is my name, not nice to meet you, welcome to VR, nothing. That was the first instinct of that counselor, is to start like that. Well, my brother tried to say, well, you know, I'm not late. No, you are late. And finally, a counselor aide comes out and says, oh, no, you're getting him confused with your other new guy. This guy's an hour early. And she said, oh, ha, I'm sorry. Come on in. But what she had done to him in that moment, right? So she was not treating him as an end in himself. She was treating him as a means to an end. For her, in that moment, and trust me, I remember what it's like when someone's late. I remember what that's like. I remember how the whole cycle of your day is screwed up. I remember how you have to set boundaries with people to make sure that they understand. I remember people would test those boundaries by I remember all that. But she was treating him as a means to an end and not as an end in himself, not as a unique human. So what happened, now I sent him to VR because that's my home, right? That's my job. That's what I love. And I tried calling him later and I said, you know, I called. I didn't get a hold of him for 3 days. He answered the phone after 3 days. I said, well, what happened? How come you haven't been answering the phone? He said, I haven't been able to get out of bed for 3 days. Is this who I am now? Is this how everyone's going to treat me moving forward? Is this who I've become? Now, to that counselor, she just saw her day was wrecked. But to my brother, he saw that he was less than human. And you don't mess with me and mine. I got his permission and called the supervisor. So ethical decision-making, to kind of put a bow on this, we want to remember we're going to be thinking of our own needs first. You might think, oh, I always think of my client. Nope. Our brains are built to think of us first. It's a survival mechanism. We have to get past that. And that's especially true during times of stress. Listen to your gut. That's your cognitive unconscious. Listen to it. Does it agree with your head? If so, but then you got to think, is my gut feeling rational? You really got to take these things, these feelings and these thoughts, and put them in front of you and kind of tease through them and look at them, not just react with them, especially when it's something that's important. And then you might want to take it to a colleague, somebody you trust, and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Because they're different than you. Their values, their understanding of the world is a little different. And review the code of ethics to make sure you're not violating anything. Consult. All right. Now, we can talk about ethics till we're blue in the face, but ultimately, between our thoughts and our actions lie our ethics. So you can have the thought of, ooh, I'm just going to drive. I'm going to hit the gas and I'm going to drive away with this wine as quickly as possible. Between your thoughts and your actions lie your ethics. That was my first thought, was, woohoo, cheap wine, right? Between your thoughts and your actions lie your ethics. So let's think about that. Between your thoughts and your actions lie your ethics. This is also between your thoughts and your actions is where our rationalizations are. It's where our self-interest is. It's where our cognitive unconscious is. So in this little mess of gorgeousness that makes us human thinkers, between our thoughts, our initial thoughts, I don't like that guy, I'm going to send him a letter. And our actions, well, maybe I could send a letter. It's not a problem. It's something that I can do. But wait a minute, how would you feel telling a colleague about this? Maybe I should talk to somebody else, right? All right, so that's why we bring this all together. Hopefully, if nothing else, and I know we're only partway through, but hopefully today when you walk away from this, you'll think, wow, I might not be more ethical than most. I might actually think that about myself, but maybe I'm kind of in the same ballgame as the rest of humanity, and that we just think of ourselves as being more ethical and moral than most. Okay. All right. So boundaries. We're going to talk a little bit about boundaries, because if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. Now, what does that mean? If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. When you are working with clients, they see you as a friend. Why? Because you act like a friend. What? I don't act like a friend. I have excellent boundaries. Who are the people in your life that you tell your financial situation, your hopes and dreams, where your barriers are? I don't go telling strangers that stuff. I don't get in an elevator and say, hey, by the way, my hopes and dreams are. You know, you don't do that because it's creepy and weird, right? But our clients come in and they tell that to a stranger, right? Because we're at least at first strangers to most of them. So we start looking like a friend, because I would tell that stuff to my friends or my family or people I trust, right? But they come in and tell it to a stranger. So suddenly it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it's a duck. Adult learners will take a new situation and they'll apply it to something they already know. So if I come in as a client, I'm going to tell you about my barriers and my financial situation and my hopes and dreams, all that stuff. I'm going to start looking at you and you're listening. You know, I'm going to be like, wow, that person's cool. That person's my friend, right? Because I'm going to attach it to the only thing I know, which anybody who acts like that's a friend. This new person is a counselor, but they, you know, we're going to attach it to the friend thing. It's normal. It's human. It's adult learning stuff. So we start with that, understanding that our clients are going to automatically see us perhaps as something that we're not. So that's where boundaries are very important. And then boundaries are also very important in the way we relay ourselves as an organization. We want to make sure that we have our assumptions correct as organizations. We're walking away from a history of the assumptions on the left side, like people with disabilities need to be taken care of. People with disabilities should direct their own course of their lives, and we're here to help them with those possibilities, right? We know that's where we are today. Decisions are to be made for our consumers, not by our consumers, right? That's the way it used to be. Well, no, decisions are person-centered. And the ethical impact, the right of the consumer to be autonomous, you know, the ethical impact, if we think of these other assumptions and behaviors, is that, you know, we're violating ethics. And if we are correct in our assumption that people should direct their own lives and that decisions are person-centered, then the right of the person to be autonomous is exercised. There's a lot of push and pull that comes with this. We are still very medical model based. I've been in the field since 1990, I think. So holy mackerel, that makes me want to lie down and take an aspirin. It's been 30 years. Is that right? Anyway, but even at that time, we had client choice was the big thing that was coming in, 90, 91, right in there. But we still carry this medical model with us, because when people come in, we do very medical model stuff. We're like, oh, well, what are your problems, blah blah blah, you know, kind of thing. When we do our intakes, it's still very medical model. So, but we still have to get away from this needing to take care of people mindset, right? It's very important for our ethics. So poor boundaries, if we're thinking in the old medical model way that people need to be taken care of, poor boundaries would show themselves in like, I'm going to give this consumer needs $10. I'm just going to give them $10. Bringing the consumers to your home, you know, oh, I know people that have done this. You know, they don't even know where to go on Christmas. Purchasing gifts for consumers, inappropriate sexual or non-sexual physical contact, that kind of stuff. That's what you do when you kind of think that when you're not looking at the person as autonomous. And then the ethical boundaries are assisting the person with employment of their choice, helping them with choice throughout the process, aiding the consumer to discover a social network of their own. You know, if you've ever worked in a job where when you left, I did this as a case manager, as a mental health case manager for 6 years, and we did everything with our clients. We took them to the store, we took them to their medical appointments. They were in my car. I'd pick them up at the psychiatric hospital and take them back home, right? All of these things that made boundaries very fuzzy. At the end, when I quit that job, I really learned about boundaries because almost all of my clients asked how they get a hold of me once I was no longer in the job. And at that point, let me tell you, there's nothing that'll make a good-hearted individual feel more like crap than having to tell a whole bunch of people that the only reason you ever hung out with them is because it was your job after the fact. Wow. Don't do that. You want to aid people to find their own social network. You don't want to be that social network. And you want to provide genuine affirmations to help build the person's confidence. What we're doing is we're hoping to work ourselves out of a job someday. You know, when a person who uses a wheelchair goes into an employer and the employer says, hey, you know what? You're the best candidate for the job. I see you're a chair user. What kind of accommodations might you need? Do you need any? When that day comes, we no longer are needed, right? We're working toward that. In the meantime, that's the civil rights of people with disabilities. In the meantime, we still got a long way to go. But we get there also by providing genuine affirmations. We want a person with disability to be better after seeing us. We want them to be better after seeing us, to be able to go out and self-advocate. And we want to set those respectful boundaries. We want to set them and reset them as needed. Because I'll tell you what, you ever get to a situation, I'm sure most of you have probably been in this situation where maybe you're single and you see somebody else and you're talking to them and you're like, I wonder if that guy's into me. And you're kind of thinking about it and you're like, it's hard to tell. He's smiling a lot. We're making a lot of eye contact. You know, that whole weird feeling of, does he like me? You know, that kind of feeling. Well, it's like that for clients with friendship, right? If we're not clear with the boundaries, I'd rather have that guy tell me, oh, I am so, you know, you're a really interesting lady, but wow, I'm super married, whatever. That would be really helpful to know up front. I'd be a lot less uncomfortable. The same is true with our clients, not with the married and, you know, dating part, but of course, but with the understanding what the relationship is, we're all better if we know what the boundaries of a relationship are up front. We can all be ourselves within that construct. All right. So there's different kinds of dual relationships that can happen. Sometimes they're voluntary, like you may enter into a dual relationship with intention. You don't want to do that with your clients. You don't want to say, oh, that person's super cool, I'm going to go be their friend. You don't want to enter into it voluntarily, but sometimes they're unavoidable. Sometimes dual relationships can happen in small communities where you're working in a real rural area and you know somebody that you might be working with. They can occur with special populations. Maybe you're a person who's deaf and you hang out with people and maybe you speak ASL. And so you hang out in your community with people who speak your language. You hang out with other people who speak ASL. That's unavoidable. Sometimes they're unexpected, where you find yourself in a dual relationship that you hadn't intended. Maybe you join a library board and you find one of your clients is also on the board. That's an unexpected. And then there's levels of intensity. You know, there's low levels of intensity in dual relationships where you run into somebody at a grocery store, or their children go to the same school as your children. There's medium level of intensity where you may go to the same church or march in the same political rally. And then there's a high level of it. So in the medium, you know, oh, okay, I know something about that. I know something about my counselor. I know that they belong to the same religious group I do. And that's actually a lot of information, right? That's a lot of information. Same thing if they're in a political rally, you know a lot about that person based in the fact that they're there, right? So church or the political rally, whatever, you learn a lot about the person. So it's a medium intensity. And then high would be serving on a committee, or maybe you're both on the same softball league or something. That's a high level of intensity. So dual relationships are vary in involuntary, unavoidable, and unexpected, and then they vary in levels of intensity. Now, because we already walk like a duck, talk like a duck, right? We want to avoid dual relationships whenever possible. If for some reason, like you live in a small community and you can't avoid a dual relationship, you need to think, what is the level of intensity here and how do I deal with it? How do I deal with it? One way you're going to have to deal with it is you're going to have to talk to the person about the fact that there's a dual relationship, and that what happens in your VR discussions does not go out in the general public. If you're all on the same softball team, you don't talk about to the other people on the softball team, you know, the fact that you're looking for a job at Best Buy or something like that. You don't share that information. And also that when you're on the softball team, you don't want to talk VR. You set those clean, clear boundaries so that your client knows, just like you would know if you were in that situation with your medical doctor or something. So you know what is what. Can you imagine being on a softball team and your medical doctor goes, hey, how's that rash? You know, you don't want that kind of information getting out there. All right. So let's see. You want to ask these questions. Is this in my client's best interest? Whose needs are being served? Will this have an impact on the service I'm delivering? How would I feel telling a colleague about this? And am I comfortable documenting this? If you're able to go through all of these and come out with, still without rationalizing a positive impact for the client, then you're probably okay. But make sure that you consult with somebody. Okay? Because again, we're beautifully flawed. We're beautifully, beautifully flawed. I'll tell you what, everyone on this call, every single one of you believes that you are right when it comes to something. I know I'm right. I'm right all the time. I have a big problem with that with my husband. I'm right and I'm stubborn. So it takes a lot of conscious effort for me to take, well, okay, this thing feels super right, but maybe I should examine it. You know, take it in, take a look at it. All right. So how do we set ethical boundaries? We do it clearly, respectfully, upfront, in a way the client understands, and as often as possible. For some of our clients, that means we have to do it over and over again. If you set good boundaries up front, you know, I love being able to say, when working with somebody, okay, here's our rules. Mine is this, and yours is this, and here's how we combine our rules, and here's how they're separate, you know, and being able to kind of discuss things like that. Having information is empowering for the person. It's sometimes we feel like, it feels kind of rotten to let them know, you know, that what their role is, you know. But no, it's not rotten. It's empowering. It's empowering to know what's going on. All right. It's up to you to explain boundaries to clients. Still, relationships should always be avoided because they're so unbelievably complicated. You want to elicit empowerment, and if physical contact is ever appropriate, the boundaries must be known. So don't go embracing everybody. I'm guessing South Dakota might be a little less huggy, maybe. Boy, the people in Milwaukee, you know, parts of Wisconsin are different, but man, you go to Milwaukee, or I've been down south too, and down south people can be pretty huggy. It's different everywhere. And focus for just a second on small community, places where boundaries and confidentiality can be tough. Here we have a coffee shop. You probably remember what those were back before February, when you could sit down next to somebody 2 feet away without a mask and just talk to them if you didn't know them. Anyway, the good old days. But in this situation, you need to be aware of your physical surroundings when it comes to confidentiality. I walked into a coffee shop here in Madison, and because I like to take my computer, I work at home, so I go to coffee shops periodically and just sit there. And I could hear a Vera counselor, I kid you not, this is the truth, 3 tables away, and they were talking to a client, and they were doing some initial information. And what I got tables away, client's social security number, client's disability, I forget what else, but I know those 2 things in particular. I was able to hear this person had schizophrenia, and I heard their social security number, and I was like, what? We got to be aware of our physical surroundings. I went over and had one of those awkward conversations. Excuse me, could I talk to you for a minute? And you can't do this here in a coffee shop. So uncomfortable, but needed to be done. And the poor counselor was just absolutely flabbergasted, like, oh, they had no idea other people, because you get in your world, right? You get in your little world with your client, you forget what's going on. Confidentiality with physical surroundings, small communities, family involvement. We know confidentiality can be tough in that. Special populations, maybe the person has a guardian. Families too. Let's say you're working with a transition student. Of course, they're underage, the parents are the guardian, but the client comes in and they're talking to you and they start telling you something that isn't VR related, and you think, oh, I wonder if the parents should know. Well, what do you do with that? I mean, just because you have a release to talk to the parents doesn't mean you have to verbatim give them a transcript of everything you talked about. How do you measure that stuff? What do you know? I'm not going to give you a direct answer, but I will give you this. Ask the question. Ask your supervisor if you get stuck in that situation. We have our duty to report. If there's a danger to self and others, for example, duty to report. Danger to self or others. And that includes vulnerable populations, including people who are older, people who have disabilities, and children. All right, we have duty to report. Sometimes that breaches confidentiality. Our record keeping, you have to be careful with that, especially now that everybody's, when you go back out in the community and you're walking around with these things, right? You're walking around with the laptop. Don't leave that sitting around. Be careful with your paperwork, your documentation when you're more mobile. Because you can accidentally breach confidentiality. I'll tell you a horror story. I once had a folder full of client information that I left on a bus. This is when I was out in Seattle working as a case manager, and I had an entire folder full of client information. It was left on the bus. There are very few times in my life where I have done something that has made me so physically ill. But I had to go back to my supervisor and say, I lost a folder full of information that had diagnosis in it, had addresses in it, had all sorts of thank goodness some employee at Boeing found it and knew it was important and brought it to my office for me. to this day, I can still picture that person's face, because that was a major potential breach of confidentiality I hadn't intended. But, you know, when you're out in the community and stuff, you leave stuff. Don't leave this stuff. Be careful. And convenience, sometimes it's more convenient to just say, you're talking to a job developer and you just want to say, they're saying, oh, well, this about the person's diagnosis and that, and you forgot to mention something in the paperwork you gave them, and you don't have maybe you don't have a release yet, and you say, oh, but this person has blah, blah, blah as well. Or maybe a job developer calls and says, hey, we got a perfect job for one of your clients. Here's this. And you say, I know the perfect client. They have this, they do this, they're qualified. And oh, well, I don't have a release to talk to you, but it doesn't matter because I'm just doing it for them, right? Sometimes convenience gets in our way and we can rationalize, you know, I really want to tell the job developer, but I know I shouldn't. Well, I'm just doing it for the client and it doesn't hurt anyone and blah, blah, blah. Next thing we know, the client comes back and says, I didn't give you permission for that. And then they call the governor, and then you are unhappy. Okay, so now we're going to get into the last little bit of this, which is boundaries at a distance, because now we're doing a lot more of that. And here we have, you know, all of the ways that people can connect. We can connect via Zoom. I kind of like Zoom, actually. It's a great way to connect with family across the country when you can't go get on a plane and see them right now, right? It's also extremely irritating after a while to only be visiting with people in one dimension, but whatevs. I'm glad we have options and technology. Can you imagine a pandemic with no technology? Oh my gosh, it'd be living in a small cabin in the 1700s or something. You'd only have the people you live with to communicate with. I don't know about you, but I still like my husband, but barely. No, that's not quite true. But it's a lot of time to be in a house with people. It's a lot of time. Without technology, I don't know where we'd be. So we're kind of lucky for this. But it brings in ethical situations too. Like, how do your contacts connect with you? Do they try to connect on Facebook? Do they try to connect on, do they find you on Pinterest? Did you know that if you don't put your profile on private, that you can be found on Pinterest? That's awkward. When your client comes in and says, I see you're an avid knitter or whatever, because you've been in Pinterest looking up Afghans, I don't know, whatever. Or they find you on Facebook. And if you don't have your privacy settings, they say, oh, it looks like you had this lovely trip last year to the Bahamas, and you look surprisingly good in a swimsuit or whatever. You know, there's so much information on some of these platforms that we don't intend to tell other people. So we have to maintain our own level of privacy, and there's privacy settings for these apps. Make sure that you make them. Set them up for yourself, because your exes are also looking for you. And if you don't want them to find you, you want to make sure that you put your privacy settings up. All right. Ethics is what happens when no one is looking. No matter how much we talk about ethics, no matter how much we talk about how the brain works, no matter how much we talk about all of us, those of you who don't think you're more ethical than most, guess what? You're probably way more ethical than you think. And those that think you're more ethical than most, guess what? You're probably way less ethical than you think. It's okay. That's part of being human. We have our own self-interests. We have that glowing part of our brain that kicks in when we hear things we agree with. We rationalize. We're kind of set up to be survivors, but we're not really set up to be great thinkers. And so we have to work at that. But we can talk about it, but it really is what happens when no one else is looking. If I was in the car by myself when I had that wine, I'd like to think I'd have gone back. All right. Luckily I wasn't challenged there. All right. Oh, and by the way, when it comes to social media, one last thing, when it comes about this particular boundaries at a distance, when it comes to social media, the same rules apply as they do to meeting people in person. So you should not have your clients on Facebook. Why? Because it's considered a friendship according to CRC, and that's not cool, right? So they should not be on Facebook. You shouldn't be connecting on LinkedIn. Why not? It's an employment app. Why wouldn't I connect with people? Because you are connecting, you're not just connecting to you, you're connecting to people who you connect with. It's complicated, but so if you and I connect on LinkedIn, and you can see, then you can connect to my first level people, right? So for example, like I have a very fancy brother-in-law. He is a high speed lawyer on like one of the top floors of one of the biggest buildings in Chicago. It's really impressive. It's very impressive. I'm impressed every time I see him. But I went to his, but I'm his friend on LinkedIn. So if I were to connect with my client on LinkedIn, then they can connect to my brother-in-law. That's just a weird thing. But they can connect with every first level person that you have. So how do you go about this if you want to connect with people using some of these apps? It's easy. You create a second one. You have a business app and you have a personal app. So you have a business LinkedIn and you have a personal Facebook, a business Facebook, whatever. If that's what your agency thinks is okay. According to the Code of Ethics, you have to have a separate one for business. And those boundaries, it has to not be friendship. You don't talk about what you had for dinner or any of those friend kind of things. That Facebook would be there for your clients to, and then even then there's a certain confidentiality you'd have to talk to them about, because if they started connecting with you on a business Facebook or business LinkedIn, now your clients know that they're all being served by the same agency. So you've just outed everybody as having a disability, and being unemployed or underemployed. So there's lots of things to think about here. But as far as ethics go and boundaries, these things should really be avoided as to be used with our clients. Now, okay, so we're gonna open this up for questions here in a second, but to just kind of tie all this together, what we've been talking about today, here we have a self-driving car. This guy is reading a book, he's seatbelted in, he looks very comfortable. Think of all the things a self-driving car would be good for. It'd be great for people who otherwise can't drive for whatever reason, right? It'd be great for people with disabilities who, for whatever reason, can't drive. It'd be great if you wanted to read a book, because reading a book while driving right now is something that's to be discouraged. You could text people. You could text and drive because the car is driving for you, right? But there is a problem with this, and the reason I call it the next trolley problem is, so these cars have to be programmed, and they have to be programmed, of course, because they're driving, right? So they have to be programmed to think about possibilities. The car has to be programmed to know if it should sacrifice the passenger if it's going to hit a pedestrian, and the passenger, if there's an accident about to happen and the passenger will be injured or the pedestrian will be injured, the car has to be programmed to make that decision. So people are programming morality into a lot of our future inventions, right? And here, I'm going to read the survey here. In a survey conducted by the researchers, 76% of participants said it would be more ethical for self-driving cars to sacrifice one passenger rather than kill 10 pedestrians, but just 23% said it would be preferable to sacrifice their passenger when only one pedestrian could be saved. And only 19% said they would buy a self-driving car if it meant that a family member might be sacrificed for the greater good. As we move forward with all of the things that are happening, you know, I can't think of anything more important for us to learn as counselors, as VR professionals, but as also members of society. You know, we're thinking of genetics now. There's already parts of the world where you can predetermine the sex of your baby. We can already find out through amniocentesis if a child has Down syndrome and make decisions around that. Very soon, we're going to be able to start making changes, maybe to genetically modify children. Our society, everything that we have, all of the tools that are resources, are the tools that we have, they're moving so quickly. The internet, right? The unintended consequences of everything that's happening right now is happening before we're able to really wrap our heads around our own thinking about such things. You know, there's unintended consequences of, for anybody who's out there that might be as old as me, you will remember before sliding doors. Right now you go to the store and the automatic doors open, which is great for everybody. It's great for us with packages. It's great for people with disabilities. It's great for a person with a stroller or a cart or a cane or a wheelchair. It's awesome. But there is an unintended consequence that happened when we moved to automatic doors. What was it like before automatic doors? I'll tell you what it was like. If you were walking through the parking lot and you're heading toward the store and there's somebody else coming, you started measuring, okay, who's going to get there first? Right? And whoever got there first opened the door for the other person. You made eye contact, and it was the other person's opportunity to say thank you or beautiful day or whatever. And you'd have that moment of connection with the stranger. The unintended consequence of that is we no longer have everyday moments where we have contact with strangers. And there's, you know, it's really hard to do studies around this kind of thing, but there's some evidence that maybe our ability to connect with strangers dropped a little bit with the automatic door, which is of course a marvelous invention. But what happened? Now we think of the technology with the phones and the computers and everything. Before technology, even before the television, people would, before central heating, and this is older than me, but before central heating, the family gathered around the fireplace. Why? Because that's the only place you could be warm. But families centered around there. Then came TV. Families centered around there. Where's your family in the evening with technology? Are they all off in their own independent rooms? It was like that with my son. When he hit a certain age, when he hit like 14, I never saw him again. He emerged out of his room when he was 20 and moved out, I think, practically, right? All that technology, he can connect with all of his friends. Pregnancy rates have gone down with the technology, right? Because in my day, if you wanted to go see your friends, you had to actually physically go see them. Now you can visit your boyfriend or girlfriend or, you know, your partner on social media, so you don't hook up as often. So you can't get pregnant yet on technology. That'll probably happen any one of these days, right? So, but there's a lot of unintended consequences that happen with technology. And as it speeds forward, if we're not able to rein our brains in and think a little more ethically, we're going to end up with the trolley problem all over again. So, which is interesting. All right, how about some questions? We have 10 minutes for questions. And I'm tired of talking to myself in the kitchen.
This is Bernie. I got a question and probably dealing with
Yeah.
boundaries with cell phones. We've just are getting cell phones for all the VR counselors out there, and Jordan put together a sheet, working with one of our supervisors on setting some boundaries, letting the people know of we only respond to text messages, voicemails during office hours, and what to do in emergency that, we're not, their contact for emergency situations. But I think the other one is we're going to have to probably set boundaries on, I think one counselor commented they had 40 some text messages in one day from a person.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know the best way to say that language to them, but we're trying to inform people the boundaries right up front on that, but that's probably one we need to probably deal with.
That's huge. That's huge. And you know what? Text, that's what you do. So guess what? The number one, at least until before COVID, the number one last year, the year before, number one complaint to CRC was, my counselor does not get back to me fast enough. Oh, I'm not CRC, CAP. Number one CAP complaint was delay in getting back to people. Why? Because it's an unintended consequence of texting. I assume that when I text someone, they will respond immediately, right? Or close to it. I don't think that it's going to take them 24 hours to respond. And if I text them in the evening, I expect them to respond in the evening. That's how text works, right? So an unintended consequence is now we have this available in cell phones, and thank you for getting cell phones for people and not expecting them to use their own cell phones. That's another boundary issue, because then of course your clients have your home phone number. But yeah, so it's new for all of us. And the unintended consequences, of course, people expect you to reply right away. So what we have to do is tell people, here's how I respond. And actually, I can send you something, Shana and Bernie, that I found on the internet about how we communicate with people. But you have to let them know, hey, guess what? If I don't respond right away, it's because I'm not going to respond for 12 hours or 24 hours or whatever. I'm only going to respond during 9 and 5. Whatever your boundaries are, make sure people know that. And then you have to reiterate it, because it's not normal for a person who uses text to have to wait 24 hours. It's not normal for any of us to have to wait within business hours to contact somebody. So that has to be very, very, very clear. And it's also it's good up front. And remember, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. For people, when they're texting with you, they're just going to assume you're like all of their friends. So that's where the boundaries need to be really clear. Also, being able to say in written form, I don't contact people on Facebook. I don't contact people when Snapchat. I don't contact people through LinkedIn. I don't do these things, but letting people know up front how to communicate with you, when to communicate, and the expectations for communication. That's huge. That's huge. Let's see.
I got a question.
Yeah.
If you feel a client is seeing you as a friend, how do you nicely tell them what your relationship actually is?
Yeah, isn't that the fun conversation that you want to have? The one that keeps you up at night practicing it the night before. And if they do think that you're a friend, being able to sit down and say, here's a good time for a chat, because I want to make sure that you really understand our relationship and how it works. It's not uncommon for other clients to think of me as a friend because of kind of the way we relate to one another. So what I have to tell them is, I look like a friend, but I'm not a friend. My role is this, and here's my boundaries. And that also applies to my work with you. I like working with you very much. And here, if you do, right? But here's the parameters around that. Here's the parameters around that. And I want you to know that so that your expectations don't get out of whack. Now, how do you feel about that? And let them tell you, wow, that sucks, man. I don't like that. I really was hoping, that you'd be my maid of honor at my wedding. And, I'm sorry that disappoints you. Have that conversation. How do you feel about this? And then when they tell you the truth, say, that was me. I wasn't being clear up front, and I'm really sorry to disappoint you. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here, knowing what we know right now? How do we proceed? What do you think? And then they'll tell you, well, maybe it'll just take a little while to get used to this. Like, that's a good answer, and I appreciate your honesty. And let me know when we're going forward if there's anything awkward or something that you don't understand. And I'm gonna be more forthright with you. Something like that. If you ask the person how they feel, it gets worse the longer you wait. Right? But you don't want to be the paid friend. You don't want to be the paid friend. So let's see. Yes, there's somebody who said that they used to have a sign up in the office that stated that they wouldn't approach them in public. So that's a good thing to do too when you're talking to clients, especially in small communities, to be able to say, if I run into you at the grocery store, don't get weirded out if I don't say hello, because here's my boundaries. When I'm out at the grocery store, I'm not Linda the counselor anymore. I'm Linda the grocery store person, right? I'm just a customer at the grocery store. So I'm not going to connect with you because I don't want other people to know, I don't want to put you in that position. If you come up to me and you want to say hi, that's fine, that's cool. But we're not going to talk about VR stuff, because we both have our in the community hats and we both have our in the office hats. And if we're able to keep that separate, both of us, we won't accidentally breach confidentiality. And, I can't work 24 hours a day. I got to be able to go to the grocery store in my sweatpants. I'll say hi to you, but, just that's who I am. And that's who you are at that moment. That's how we keep our boundaries clear. Talk a little bit about gifts of appreciation. Yes, we can talk about that real quick. Sometimes people come in with gifts and, of course, there's monetary values on gifts. So if a person comes in with a diamond ring, this belonged to my grandmother. You're my new favorite person and I want you to have it. Well, that is definitely, it's easy to say on that one, like, oh, I cannot take a diamond ring from you for value reasons, for all the complicated reasons of that. That can be easy to say no to, right? No, I can't take the diamond ring. But if someone comes in with cookies or, a hand knit pot holder, I said pot holder in Colorado and they thought it was something totally different. That's what we call them in the Midwest, right? A pot holder is a oven mitt kind of thing, right? Yeah, don't say it in Colorado. They got the wrong idea. But so somebody comes in with something like that, well, then it's it depends on your supervisor, it depends on your office, it depends on a lot of things. If a person comes in with cookies, it's not unethical to say, first set the boundary, say, I'm not supposed to accept gifts from anyone. This is a real, genuine act of kindness. And if it's all right with you, I'm going to share it with the office, right? You can do that. You can get away with that. Make sure you set the boundary in there too. Someone gives you a pot, a oven mitt, that they hand knit. Again, it's not something of low value, but what is the intention behind it? It's one thing to make cookies, but knit one, purl two for an entire oven mitt? That's a lot of thinking about you, right? It starts to get a little more intimate. You want to say, this is very kind. I'm going to put it in our kitchen for the office. And just so you know, I'm not supposed to accept gifts, but I'll accept it on behalf of the office. That kind of thing. You get away with it because then you're not setting up a dynamic that's kind of like, I give you something, you give me something back, or that friendship thing. If you got a oven mitt from a friend, that'd be different. So talk to your supervisor about that. Talk to your talk to the folks. But when you're taking the cookies on behalf of the office, that's a good time to set those boundaries. So, speaking of cookies, I think it's time for me to go have my lunch. I'm having cookies for lunch. So I want to thank everybody. It's been an absolute privilege. I wish I could have been there. I wish we could have all been in person so we could have had more of a conversation, because I really love that. I love being in South Dakota. If you're looking for online classes, look for the VR development group. I forgot to mention that we have online classes at the beginning. But I want to thank Bernie and Shayna for helping me get to this point today. And I want to thank all of you for what you do. It's very important what you do, and it's very important to a lot of people, especially during this stressful time. Good for you for ponying up and showing up for people. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Linda. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Good luck with the fishing.
Oh, yeah, I need luck.
Bye-bye.